What is the thing you love the most about being able to stream to an audience live?
I love the interaction. I love talking to people. It's so fun. And getting like an insight into other people's lives. And I feel like there is no greater sense of fulfillment than having like a positive influence on someone else.
Yeah, that's good.
Which might sound grandiose for like gaming, but you know, when someone's like, oh, I'm so happy to see you live, or you've kept me company during a tough time, like, that's so nice, right? And being someone who like, I've been a viewer of the same content creator or type of content creator that I then became. I understand that position so well that it just feels really good. Yeah.
Now, how long have you been doing this? For about,
oh my God,
almost 10 years or
8-9 years.
8-9 years. You've been in the kind of streaming space.
Yeah. Crazy.
Do you feel like after almost a decade of being in the space that you fit in or that you belong?
I think I would probably say both at this point, but mainly because it feels like I really carved out a space for myself. I like took years building my own little chair, and I'm like, I'm gonna sit here, okay? You can't do anything about it. And luckily then, you know, I got my little circle of friends, and now I feel like safe and really like I belong.
You belong in that community, right? Maybe you fit into the whole community, but in your community you belong.
Yeah.
What is it about you that makes your community love you the most?
Oh, I don't know. Ask them. I would want to say that I try to be as like upbeat as I can. Just naturally, that's what I like to do. I feel like I've been very lucky to have had this career at a kind of pivotal time within streaming. And I feel weird saying this about myself, but it feels very nice when members in my community are like, oh, you inspire me, or you motivate me, or you make me feel like I can stream as a woman, as this, as that. You know what? You make me feel like it's okay. That is so, so kind.
You see comments come through constantly. Most of your community, I'm assuming, is in their teens and their early 20s. Is that correct? Most of the community?
I would think so, yeah.
Why do you think so many people in their teens and early 20s struggle with mental health and motivation today?
Honestly, I hate to say it as someone who profits from this industry, but I think social media has a big hand in that. I also think, though, that there are just a lot of modern day issues that feel very isolating or difficult for people to deal with. I think that would off the top of my mind.
Do you feel like people are more isolated, that they don't have a purpose, or they feel like they don't belong in their communities that causes them to suffer mentally?
All of the above. And the internet can be a great getaway. Like, even for me personally, when I was in high school, it felt like I had a bit of a double life. It's like, like Hannah Montana, I would go to high school. I was like part of the student council with all my friends, and I'd go home and I would only be online with like my online friends. And I felt like I bonded with so many people over gaming, people that I felt like I couldn't have those types of connections with my friends that I knew in real life.
Really?
Yeah.
So you had deeper connections online than in-life connections?
I think so, yeah. But also it's like, that's kind of when you connect the most with people.
Right.
On your off time, experiencing things together. And gaming with someone is experiencing something
Bonding.
together.
You're like
It
competing,
is.
you're going for a challenge, let's go.
Absolutely. You have like the same hobby. Okay, the first game that I started streaming was called League of Legends. And during that time, like before it started blowing up, it was like any time I met someone who also played, it was like, oh, you know, immediate connection.
Club.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like a secret club. And so that sentiment is so, so nice. And I think we're also living in a day and age where all human beings are so multifaceted, and especially like the Gen Z's generation. Everybody is so unique and different, but sometimes you grow up either going to a school or in a city or in a household where you don't feel like every part of you is really accepted. And that leads to not feeling like you belong, isolation, and And sometimes, luckily, you can get that sentiment online.
Yeah.
But then sometimes being online too much can also hurt your mental health. So
Right. It's a balance.
yeah.
Did you always feel like you were accepted at home?
I always felt very loved, yeah, and accepted, but just like it was a little bit stricter, and I just always felt like the most important thing was like following the rules, making my parents proud, go to, get straight A's. Oh my God, yeah, such a nerd.
Go to college.
Get straight A's, go to college, study engineering, law, or become a
Medical,
doctor, yeah. And like that was the path laid out for me. That's it.
So when you went to school and you studied, I think, chemical engineering, right? And then you dropped out eventually,
Yeah.
which is almost like a death to an immigrant's parents, right? It's like, I cannot believe
What do you
there's no
mean?
other option than getting an
Yeah,
amazing
and
degree.
for years after taking a break from school, I didn't call it dropping out at the time.
I want to pause.
Yeah, I'd be making like 6 figures, maybe even 7 at one point, and mom's like, "So when are you gonna go finish your degree?"
Wow.
I'm like, "I'm making more than I would have made with my degree. Are you kidding me?" So yeah, it was like
Wow.
always that plan laid out for me. So I just grew up in that sense, like people pleasing for my parents and then people pleasing for audiences around the world. And I was just always thinking of like, what should I do? Do the quote unquote right thing. And it was only within the last like 2 years that I'm really trying to rewire my brain to think about like, what do I want to do?
All right.
The wants instead of the shoulds. That's what my therapist said. He's like, you have a bad case of the shoulds. It's like, what do you mean? Stop thinking about what you should do. What do you want to do?
Yeah. How has that been a struggle to kind of break the rules of what your parents want or what you feel like your community wants and actually doing what you want?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because when you fall into that feedback loop of like, what do other people want of me? You get validation from that, right? Like, oh, I posted this thing and I, calculated it to be what they would like and they liked it.
It worked.
Right? And then maybe you post what you want.
And they don't like it.
Not as much. And you're like craving that validation, So it's for sure a part of the job that you need to manage so that you don't, because if you keep feeding that beast, it gets bigger, but it is a part of the job as well. So yeah.
How do you manage?
Things in moderation.
How do you manage now dealing with ego and validation and also just feeling really good about you? Not doing something for ego or validation, but for you and also being able to impact people. How do you manage that?
A lot of journaling. I plan on my whole life. So basically, and also it's almost like I'm rehabilitating myself. Like, cognitive behavioral therapy. I feel like I do that to myself. For example, instead of posting something and immediately looking at like, are people liking this? What are they commenting? How is it performing? Et cetera, et cetera. If I know it's something that I liked and that I feel good about, or I feel like it's going to reach and resonate with the right people, I just let it go. And I try to just forget about it. So I'm almost like training myself to not crave that feedback loop as much.
The dopamine hit.
Yes, and not be so tied to the results. So I that, and instead setting other goals for myself. Because the thing about validation from other people, frankly, to me, it was like a school rubric. And for a long time, I'm like, I wish with content creation, you could get a rubric. Like, am I doing good enough? The numbers never stop going. So what is good enough? And even maybe people climbing like the corporate ladder might be able to relate. It's like, when are you supposed to feel enough, or in any aspect, right? Whatever you're optimizing, how do you know it's enough? So figuring out make your own rubric, make your own goals as opposed to following what is maybe more traditional, whether that's like, what does success look like to others, or just focusing on like monetary value, things like that. Figure out what you actually want to optimize or reach.
Yeah. Do you feel enough right now?
Luckily, yes. I want to say yes. I feel like I am reaping the rewards of like, I feel like a year or 2 of trying really hard to work on myself so that I don't keep being the same version of myself that I was all of these years. Not that that was a bad version, but I just feel like, you know, the beautiful thing about life is that it's so dynamic and you can choose who you want to be at any point just by changing the decisions that you make, right? Because we are kind of just like a culmination of our decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it took a lot of thinking and planning of like, what do I want the next phase of my life to be? Because I can 100% keep streaming every day. Forever? I don't know. But I felt like I wouldn't change it all. I wouldn't grow as a person. I wouldn't experience new things. So how do I make this change? How do I let go and try something new?
Right. What was the biggest thing you had to rewire in your brain in the last couple of years? What was that shift that you had to really transform to get you to the current place you're at now? We're all work in progress, but to be where you are right now, what did you rewire?
For sure, just like, I'm so type A. I mean, studying engineering, I'm just always thinking about optimization. Optimize. That's why, you know, I'm a content creator. I work with algorithms and stuff, right? So I think letting go of that a little bit and recreating new goals has been difficult, but very worthwhile, because you can find, like, what you find fulfilling might change over years, right? So figuring that out constantly.
When do you feel the most loved and the most enough?
I think it was really, really important for me to find ways to recreate those sentiments that are not relating to my work. And like really carving out a private life, like good relationships with friends that I trust. And that is actually like such a priority for me. I think with them, I feel very loved and enough. And also when I put myself out there in a way that I know is not optimized to my audience, but people still really enjoy it. That means a lot to me.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're not trying to do what they want or what the algorithm is telling you to do, but you're just like, you know, I want to talk about this. I want to create this type of content, and here's what's on my heart and my soul and my mind. Put it out there, and maybe it's not the biggest thing ever, but it still does well.
Yeah. Or some people say like, oh, it really resonated with me, or I took this away and have implemented it into my life. Yeah, that is so fulfilling. Makes me feel good.
Do your parents actually know what you do?
Now, yes.
Because it took my parents, my whole family, probably, I don't know, until 2 years ago to know what I was doing. Because they're like, what are you doing with this online marketing thing? What is this? How do you make money? You know?
Once, my mom's a teacher, so once her students pieced it together,
they're like, oh.
And they started calling her Poki's mom, then she started getting it. She stopped telling me to go back to school.
That's funny. Not Pokimane, but Poki's mom.
Yeah. Poki's mom. Hi, Poki's mom.
That's hilarious.
It's so cute. She's like, I get a lot of benefits at school from being your mom. I'm like, good. You deserve them. You've sacrificed so much for me, as you should, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But did it take them a few years?
Yeah,
when you
absolutely.
Were like, when you finally
they still don't really understand streaming. They can get around like YouTube videos, TikTok. Streaming is still a little bit of a bubble. Yeah.
Yeah. But how long, because you essentially quit college, so how long until they were like, okay, you don't need to go back? Like, we get it. You're okay on your own. You're not going to starve and be alone the rest of your life. How many more years was that after you paused college?
4 or 5?
Wow.
A while. I would say maybe 4. 4 years of like, everything
What's
okay? Are you coming back?
Give me some money.
Yeah. No, even now, I paid for my parents' retirement, and my mom will still be like, do you need some money? But it's really, really sweet. And frankly, I feel like the biggest privilege I've had in life was having caring and attentive parents. Regardless of like, oh, were they kind of strict? Did that make me feel whatever?
They cared.
They were there for me. They cared.
Wow.
They loved me 100%. And even when I like ran off to LA to do God knows what, they still always told me like, if all else fails, you have a bed in our home with us. Like, you can always come back here. And I feel like that's something that everybody deserves. And it hurts my heart and soul so much that it just feels so unfair that some people don't have parents that treat them that way. I don't know. I'm like, can I treat you that way? I'll make an extra bed for you.
Right.
But yeah, it feels like genuinely the greatest privilege I've had in life.
Oh, that's cool. What decision have you made that you're the most proud of?
Frankly, persevering through very difficult, weird online situations.
Really?
Yeah, there were a lot of times where, like, as the #1 Twitch female streamer, I was put in a position where I really didn't want to be. Not that position in particular, but just like being talked about in certain ways. Either like people being inappropriate towards me or like sexualizing me when I really didn't want to be, or spreading rumors or this and that, especially on like a large stage in front of communities and whatever happened. Doing my best to react in like the right way, in a way that would make other women in the space feel safe. And I think the messages that I still get to this day of people like being grateful for that means the world to me. Yeah.
So when you were facing some of these difficulties, you know, the ego wants to defend, it wants to react, it wants to...
And sometimes I did, and then I had to apologize for that.
It wants to, you know,
Yeah.
say what it needs to say. It wants to, you know, whatever you want to
Sure
do,
does.
right? You know, it wants justice.
Yeah.
It wants fairness.
Like, this doesn't feel fair.
It's not fair. It's not right. That's not true. This
Yeah.
is... Why did they do this? So how did you respond in a, I guess, conscious way that people still talk about today? How was that response?
I think when you're in tough situations like that, especially when you feel that ego kicking in, you need to get advice from other people. People that you trust, people that you know will give you an honest answer. And don't get advice from one person, ask like 10 people, you know?
So don't just jump on video and say how you feel right away.
Been there, done that. Not the best idea, but really formulating like, how do I want to go about this? And as I said before, like, if I was in the audience instead of in my shoes, how would I want to see my favorite content creator or someone that I look up to respond or react? You know, what would I find inspiring? What would I find benefits this ecosystem as a whole of like live streaming, of gaming, this community? How can I make a good impact when I know people are watching or are waiting for my answer?
Right. How many people are on the streaming Twitch world?
Oh, many.
How many million people are on the platform? I'm not even aware.
Well, I have like 9 million followers, so more than that.
Right.
And
how many people, just to give context, because I'm assuming a lot of people watch or listen to this, my community isn't on Twitch as much. What is what is the top people on Twitch? How many live viewers will they have on an average day?
Well, Twitch has gone through like its ups and downs. So like the peaks were like 50, 100,000 viewers.
Live.
Yeah.
For some of the top people. For you as well?
When everybody was at home during the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah. I've had numbers like that, which is insane.
100,000 people watching live.
What? Like, you
For
can't even
hours.
fathom that.
Yeah.
Right?
The football stadium.
Exactly. But nowadays, it's calmed down a little bit, and it's more so people who are like really dedicated to watching. So like probably the top live streamers maybe have like 50,000. I'm more around like 10,000, which is still like a ton. I feel like that was like, I hit 1 to 5,000. I'm like set for life. Like that's fine.
Right.
And then you get into it and you're like, the way that it can snowball is crazy.
Wow. And what is the strategy moving forward for you with business, with branding, with managing, you know, this community and this audience and kind of reinventing yourself? What's the vision you have moving forward?
As I said before, I've just like written down a bunch of mantras that I want to live my life according to.
What are those?
Some are just like, I mean, if I had my phone, I'd tell you right away. But, like for example, instead of just focusing on content that either I know people will like or that is like optimized for the algorithm or whatever, balancing that with an equal amount of content that is for like a specific community of people that I want it to resonate with. Like every piece of content doesn't need to be a banger. Sometimes you just want to cultivate a community or tell like-minded people how you feel, what you think, make them feel like they're not alone. And sometimes that's not everyone, and that's okay, right? It's more so about, again, creating that community of people that you will be proud to be a part of. Yeah.
And what about the business that you have going forward? Is it less streaming and so therefore potentially less revenue there, and you're trying to generate revenue in other places? What's that strategy for you?
Yeah, so it was a little bit twofold making that decision.
Because you're not streaming all the time anymore, right?
Not anymore, no. I'll stream maybe like 2-3 times a week as opposed to like almost every day kind of thing.
Still 6 hours or a little less?
I'll do like 4 to 8 hours, something like that.
But half the week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is different. And I'm working on other projects. As you know, like when your income is directly tied to your time, it's not very scalable. And it can be very tiring if you're trying to optimize how much you make, right?
Well, it's all on you too.
Yes.
It's like the energy of your face, your persona, your brand. You've got to be on constantly. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I love the business marketing aspect of everything. So interesting to me. So I'm in the works. I have a project that will launch when it launches.
Sure.
And that's been such a fun, like, just passion of mine. And I wouldn't have had the time to pursue it if I didn't actively make the decision to, stream less and explore other things. But for a long time, it was really hard, especially as I said, like coming from an immigrant family or like being an immigrant, it's like the number one thing is to make it financially and like pay back your parents. And that has always been like such a heavy factor in my decision making that to rewire that was a little bit difficult. And again, I'm so lucky to even be able to make the decision not to. But I'm sure I'm not the only one out there. Like I find there's probably a lot of people who end up working so hard in one direction. For example, especially like the corporate ladder, and then you wind up somewhere where maybe you're making good pay, but you might not be as happy as you thought you were.
Right.
So what do you do then, right? And I feel like there were like different seasons of my life, and I intentionally decided to make one season like the season of like, I would just grind. Let me just grind until I'm financially stable enough to do whatever I want. So that was, even having that opportunity is very lucky again. It's very difficult for me to talk about these things because I don't want to come off like out of touch or privileged, even though being a content creator, you frankly just are. But speaking frankly, that was just a decision that I decided to make. I was like, I'm going to make less money so I can have a more fun life.
Sure.
But before that, I'm going to grind myself off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my parents don't have to worry, and I don't have to worry.
That's amazing. Well, you wanted to have more peace, more harmony,
yeah,
more balance in your life. And I think, you mentioned being a content creator is a privileged life. And I think for some, I think there's a lot of content creators that don't make any money, that don't have either the timing, the talent, the skill, the drive that you've had, where it's really popped off and worked for you. Some people try and it doesn't work for whatever reason. And there's a lot more people that struggle trying to make a living from content. I think it's a challenging thing. So for you to be able to do what you've done is inspiring and impressive, but it sounds like you figured out, you can't keep doing the same grinding thing nonstop.
For some people, they can, and if that makes them happy,
right.
All the more power to them.
I'm curious, you've had 8-9 years of kind of experience in the streaming world and just reinvented yourself a few different times and grown and, been to therapy and all these different, had some hardships and dealt with some stress. You didn't feel like you belonged or fit in at times. If you could go back to your 16-year-old self and give 3 pieces of advice before you kind of jumped into this world of streaming and online personality to set her up for success, what would you say to her?
I would actually start off by saying, like, disarm yourself a little bit. apologizing is not a bad thing. Sometimes things may feel unfair, but not everything is about what's fair or not. Life in general is not fair. So take a moment. Like anytime you feel defensive or reactive, it's much better to just take a moment. I also like to think like, I don't dwell on this kind of question too much because I'm like, what if I this, what if I that? Would I go back and change this decision? At the end of the day, I'm like, as cheesy as it sounds, I really do view every mistake as like a learning lesson. That's also how I cope. I'm like, I might have made that mistake, but I learned from it. What else can I do?
Sure.
So you just let it go. Definitely that would be number one. Number two is like try very hard to stay true to yourself. But that's a lesson you learn. Sometimes you stray too far one way and you're like, I don't really feel like me. And then you veer back a little bit throughout life, probably. And lastly is probably to prioritize your health as much as you can. Physical, mental, in whatever ways that you can, because, that's the number one limiting factor of anything you want to accomplish, right?
For those who look up to you, and whether it be young women or men that are like, I want to get into streaming, I want to make this a full-time career or content creation, what's the one thing you would have people do with an hour a day before they did any of their content? If you could have an hour to do this one thing to set yourself up for a better life, what would that be?
Before making
Before
the
you
content?
start, before you're 10 hours a day grinding and just going for 5 to 10 years, if you had to carve out an hour a day for something else, what would that be?
Honestly, before your day, get some sunlight, 10 minutes, meditate, 10 minutes, and have a well-balanced meal, 10 minutes. Honestly, move your body somehow. That's it. Those 4 things, and your quality of life will improve significantly, and you will be minimizing the downsides of however hard you want to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot of, I see the younger generation, and I see a lot of them just either on their phone for 10 to 15 hours a day, and it looks like they're either consuming TikTok or Snapchat or Twitch or whatever, or just messaging their friends all day, or they're on a screen, some type of screen. And I just feel like I see the power of using social media, and it's what I've done to build my business as well, but I also know how powerful it is to disconnect every day.
Not just powerful, I think necessary.
Yeah.
I wish there was more education surrounding that topic, especially for the younger generation, parents nowadays who have to figure out how to manage their kids' relationship with these devices. It's all very new territory, but people need to be very, very cognizant of the ways that it can shape your mind. And I mainly speak to this, especially for young girls, because I know how detrimental it can be to their self-perception, their confidence, all of these things, yeah.
What does looking at yourself, looking at other women on social media or streaming with filters and, modification apps do to young women?
It makes you feel not right. I feel like we're constantly being told, whether we recognize it or not, when we see something repeatedly and we see something be praised repeatedly, we know, oh, this is what's right, and anything that doesn't look like that is wrong.
Wow.
And so I think it's very important to, one, be wary of who you follow. Are you diversifying who you follow? Are you following them because of how they look, because of what they say? What are the reasons for that? And are those reasons good? And then 2, I just implore people to spend more time in real life, frankly, because online you see a lot of the same, but when you're just walking around real life, you see what real bodies look like, what people look like up close. we all have wrinkles and spots and this and that, and not everybody's flat stomached, and even the people who post photos like that at some point are not, like after a big meal. So like, yeah, go to the gym, see real people working out, what those things actually look like. Otherwise, our perception is just a culmination of what we see. If all that we see is optimized, filtered, modified in some way, it's not realistic. So make sure to spend an equal amount of time in a more realistic environment.
Has that affected you at all, seeing other women, you know, on social media with filters and everything else?
For sure. And I mean, partially just as a viewer or as an audience or a woman in her 20s, you know, it's like, oh, this kind of style is praised a lot. Should I do this? Should I do that? And then secondly, as a content creator, like, oh, people really like this kind of look. Would it be optimizing my business to look this way? You get what I mean? There's so many levels to it. And I think going down that rabbit hole too much, one, hurts your brain. And two, honestly detracts from the fun and more like fulfilling parts of content creation, which is like making someone happy.
Right.
Or putting something out that means a lot to me, as opposed to focusing too much on appearances. It can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I've had, like, anytime I feel my brain getting caught up in that a little bit too much, I'm like, okay, let's reel it back. Let's reevaluate how much time I'm spending online, what I'm thinking about, the kind of content that I consume. That's really important too.
Right.
Yeah, like you said, your whole TikTok is motivational stuff.
It is motivation.
And so that's what your brain is going to be all about, and the things that you talk about is going to be all about that too.
Exactly.
Being a minority helps you almost like stand out in a way as a content creator when there's something that differentiates you from everyone else, right? If you see 100 people and they're kind of similar, or like even if they're like the same gender and then there's one girl, you're like, oh, at least like your eye is kind of drawn there, like this is different, right? So maybe that's an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage